Nuclear strikes in Kyiv, a global digital war, and an ultimate confrontation between Russia and NATO. What would happen if Ukraine won the war? The initial Russian invasion of Ukraine met with a mixture of success and failure. Attacking from 4 different axes, the thrust south out of Belarus toward Kyiv was meant to be a fatal decapitation strike that ended the war in days. Yet this swift war-ending plan would meet with one of the most catastrophic strategic failures of the post-World War II age. Logistics completely mishandled, Ukrainian resistance and capabilities utterly underestimated, and Russian troops and equipment revealed to be severely lacking in training, capability, and even basic maintenance. The attack on Kyiv showed the world that the once feared Russian army was a lumbering, hapless giant, doing as much harm to itself as its enemies. However, for all its failures in the north, the attack on southern Ukraine was much more successful, and Russia achieved some of its finest operational successes in its drive toward Kherson. Ukrainian forces were routed and forced to retreat time and again, and even Ukrainian air power was successfully suppressed there. Unlike other areas of the country where slow, unstealthy Bayraktar drones destroyed very expensive and sophisticated air defense vehicles. Yet, for all its success in the south, the Russian offensive came to a slow crawl at the start of the summer. Once it was clear that Ukraine would not fold in a matter of weeks, the United States had already made plans to supply it with combat vehicles, including the famous or infamous, depending on which side of the new Iron Curtain you stand, HIMARS system. Armed with long-range precision strike capabilities, Ukraine now could make Russia really suffer by destroying ammo depots and command posts deep behind the front lines. Inevitably, the Russians were forced to put their logistical hubs further back, out of HIMARS range, which slowed the rate of resupply, slowing the entire Russian offensive. By mid-summer, the offensive was making daily gains measured in single-digit meters. By the end of the summer, the offensive was officially stalled out. Then Ukraine launched its counterattack, retaking vast swaths of territory in the north and putting serious pressure on Kherson, the only regional capital and major city Russia had managed to take. By November, Kherson was liberated, and the world was finally asking the question, could Ukraine defeat Russia? And what would happen if it did? First though, how could Ukraine defeat Russia? Russia may be a corrupt, inept, and unsophisticated military fighting with 20th century doctrine, but it's still a significant threat to a nation like Ukraine. What Russia lacks in modern equipment, training, food for its soldiers, blankets, literally everything, it makes up for in sheer numbers. Yes, Russian conscripts may be sent to the front lines with only 4 magazines of ammunition and having fired their weapon just one time, but they are being sent there in droves. 300,000 have already been conscripted, and with Russia enacting stop-loss measures to prevent people leaving the military after their contract is up, and the biannual conscription drive, the Russian forces are set to remain significant in number for a very long time to come. Quantity is a quality all its own, and while this would not matter against the forces of a modern Western military, Ukraine simply doesn't have the hardware and experience to deliver the type of shock-and-awe warfare that saw vastly outnumbered US forces routinely defeat much larger militaries in the last 30 years. To defeat Russia in the occupied territories, Ukraine is going to have to send a lot of conscripts home in body bags. Adding to the difficulties is the fact that Russia is now on the defensive, which gives even their inexperienced and low-morale conscripts a significant advantage. The US and its European allies will have to continue to supply Ukraine with modern weapon systems while providing financial support. The introduction of American weapons like HIMARS or HARM, the high-speed anti-radiation missile, were absolute game-changers for Ukraine. HARM missiles have been and will continue to be of critical importance as Ukraine prepared and executed its counteroffensive. While HIMARS allowed Ukraine to shape the battlefield in preparatory operations, HARM is what allowed even unsophisticated Bayraktar drones to operate in the southern territory, providing direct fire support to troops. The US quickly identified HARM as a critical necessity for Ukraine early in the spring, but the problem was that the American HARMs were configured to be carried and fired by Western planes. The US quickly set engineers on the problem who jerry-rigged the solution, allowing American HARMs to talk with Ukrainian MiGs. With that hurdle cleared, Ukrainian fighters soon took to the skies to undertake wild weasel suppression of enemy air defense missions. Russia worked hard to discredit HARM as an effective weapon. It spread disinformation about HARM weapons locking onto microwaves in the Donbass, which if true would only make these weapons even more terrifying, not less, as the sensitivity required to detect let alone target faint microwaves from hundreds of miles away is astronomical. But Russia's media campaign to discredit the US and its weapons and reassure its own civilians was unraveled by the simple observation that before harm was in theater, Ukraine's slow drones weren't operating anywhere near the Kherson front. After harm, Ukrainian drones were back to their favorite hobby of blowing up Russian vehicles. That's good because the poor things were probably horribly bored after enjoying the absolute Disneyland that was blowing up the 40-mile-long convoy outside Kyiv. With over 24 HIMARS systems in Ukraine, and not one of them verified as destroyed yet, Ukraine is going to need even more of not just HIMARS and HARM, but other modern weapon systems. Without this critical force multiplier, even Ukraine's massive conscription effort, which began at the start of the war and is now paying dividends in thousands of trained soldiers per week, won't be enough to win a true victory. Western powers know this too, and there have been ongoing discussions about which modern systems can be sent to Ukraine. The United States is, for instance, still training Ukrainian pilots to fly the F-15 Eagle, an extremely capable aircraft for the types of missions Ukraine needs fighters for. The effort will take a very long time to complete though, meaning that Ukrainians flying American F-15s won't be possible at least until next summer, as the training is simply too intensive. The Abrams has also been identified as a possibility for sending to Ukraine. Back in September, the US confirmed that Abrams tanks were on the table for Ukraine. However, to date, not a single tank has been sent. Much like training pilots to fly the F-15, training Ukrainian tank crews on the Abrams will take time. However, it's not just about training, but also the fact that sending the M1 Abrams to Ukraine will require the creation of an entire logistics chain to support the tank in battlefield conditions. This also takes time, a lot of it, and a lot of money and personnel. So if the Abrams does make its debut in Ukraine, it likely wouldn't happen until late next year. Leopard 2s, Gripen fighters, and more air defense systems. Ukraine's wish list is long, but absolutely necessary if it's to win over Russia. At the moment, Ukraine is likely capable of pushing for a ceasefire, and indeed it seems as if Russia is even willing to negotiate a settlement. But victory for Ukraine, as made clear by both President Volodymyr Zelensky and his people, means taking back all occupied territories, including Crimea. With Russian forces deeply entrenched in Crimea, there's no chance of this happening without massive and ongoing Western support. So, what if Ukraine does win? Ukraine's wishes to join the EU and NATO is what prompted the crisis to begin with. The last thing Vladimir Putin wanted to see on his watch is yet another neighbor coming under the influence of Western powers, so that's why he launched a war that ended up creating 2 new NATO members. However, even in victory, it's not certain that Ukraine would be fast-tracked into membership of both organizations. For one, a defeat of Russia in Ukraine, especially one that sees Russia lose Crimea, would be of nearly unbearable national shame for the nation. Russia is not the most logical or reasonable of actors, and the threat of it using nuclear weapons is very real. Russia may simply decide to launch a nuclear attack on Ukraine if it moves directly to NATO or EU ascension, a direct provocation to the West daring to strike back at Russia with its own nukes. This is very unlikely to happen for a nation that's not even in the club yet. Of course, that's if Putin is still in power, as a total defeat in Ukraine would signal the end of Putin's political career. While he has done a great job at eliminating rivals and consolidating his power, the halls of the Kremlin are full of people eager to see Putin fall so they can take over. Unfortunately, most of them are even worse than Putin and might be even more dangerous in total defeat, not less. While someone like Dmitry Medvedev, a former prime minister installed by Putin during a break in his presidential terms, could take power for themselves, he would be too weak on his own, and likely end up serving as a puppet to someone the likes of Wagner Group owner and real-life grimace, Yevgeny Prigozhin. Prigozhin is a deeply nationalist figure, and as merciless and ruthless as Putin, he's unlikely to take the utter humiliation of Russia sitting down. After Russia's defeat, it's also likely that the international community will order Russia to pay reparations to Ukraine. If it fails to do so, it'll face even more decoupling from the global economy. Ongoing sanctions meant to deter Russia from ever becoming a serious threat again would likely see Russia turn into a third-world economy, not necessarily in size but in scope, as the nation loses all ability to compete in technological markets or acquire sophisticated electronics. In several years' time, a new Russian revolution is not out of the question, as citizens grow increasingly angry over the economic fallout from the failed invasion. An inevitable result of Russia's war, even if it wins at this point, is a complete reshaping of the balance of power in the non-Western aligned world. China would officially dethrone Russia as the most important economic, military, and political power amongst the community of non-Western aligned nations. Yet another humiliating blow to Russian national prestige, but a major propaganda victory for China, as it still chafes from the embarrassment of having to rely heavily on the Soviet Union handouts during the Cold War. Now go check out how Ukraine prevented a Day 1 Russia win. or click this other video instead.